Sorry, guys, I got interrupted. So we're going to have a part two for this lecture. Um, okay, page 90. We're going to talk about Akhenaten. All right, and this is a really interesting, though fairly brief period of Egyptian history. So Akhenaten, um, E- Egyptian Egyptian religion, as we talked about, was pantheistic, right, or polytheistic. Okay, they had a pantheon of gods. They worshipped multiple gods. Even though, for example, Ra was very important, there were other important gods such as Osiris. Right, all of these were crucial. Um, and Akhenaten said, "Nope, we're going down to one." and he there's a debate as to whether or not he said, okay, all of these other gods are not gods at all, or yes, they are gods, but they're so minor and so unimportant as to not be worth worshiping. This is a concept called henotheistic. So either, either way, he abolished worship of all gods except for the sun disk, Aten. Um, he actually ended up changing his own name. It was originally Amenhotep IV. Moved the capital to from Thebes to a new city, Akhenaten, um, and this changed everything. Egypt didn't know what to do with itself. Even art changed. We're used to these very formal poses, right? This very crisp look, very refined forms. If you look at the image, though, on page 91, right, much different than what we're used to seeing. Um, Now, people, the argument that is often made is that he really didn't care about religion. What he actually cared about was breaking the power of the priesthood. So by saying, okay, there's only one God, and I'm the priest of only one God, because there is only one God to be priest of, he centralizes power to himself, right? All the priests of other gods, they become unimportant. And so the priests who have so much control, and all of these different uh, deities, priests, all of them fighting for power and influence, he makes them irrelevant almost immediately, right? Because there's no real priest except for that of Aten, and that is him. Um, so we see a new style, what was called the Armana style, a new style of art. And of course, here is one of the names that we often hear of in Egypt, and that is the name of his wife, Nefertiti, who is probably a better known name than his own. And Nefertiti, a powerful woman in her own right, a renowned even at the time for just incredible beauty as well. But there's again images of her as a powerful person, as if not an equal to her husband, certainly somebody who was powerful enough in her own right to have influence and control. Um, and so Nefertiti was Akhenaten's wife. Um, we see there's an image of her actually killing prisoners, which is something the king normally does, uh, but also portrayed, as we see in the image, as mother as well. Now, Akhenaten's rule was not an incredibly long one. Um, and after he died, this went away. This brief period of monotheism went away. Um, and the uh, Tukhtanaten uh, took over Egypt at that point. He changed his name from Tukhtanaten, again worshipping Aten, the sun god, to Tukhtananum, which is a more traditional Egyptian deity, Amen. Um, and of course, we know King Tut, the boy king, right? Um, which is the reason we know him so well is because of all the tombs of Egypt. His is probably the only one that is preserved in its entirety, the only one that we have found thus far. and the treasures and are, were not stolen, were not pillaged by tomb thieves. So um, he did not. His reign was not an especially long one, only 9 years, but he brought Egypt back from this monotheistic phase into its worshiping its polytheistic pantheon. Um, 92 gets into page 92 gets into more detail on the process that we talked about earlier, the heart being weighed against the feather, um, believing that the heart contained emotions, intellect, character, all of this um, represented all the good and evil of a person's life. And if weighed against an ostrich feather, so at least it wasn't like a small feather, it was an ostrich feather. If it was heavier, then the person would be fed to a creature called a mir, part crocodile, um, uh, yeah, part hippopotamus, so and part lion. So yeah, to be devoured by Amir would be a very slow, painful, and really horrid experience. Um, okay, Tutankhamun's time through the late period, and then eventually the ultimate fall of the 3,000 years of Egyptian culture when they were conquered by the Romans. Basically, standard Egyptian uh, culture remained in place. Um, there were some exceptions to this. Excuse me. We do have, of course, Nubia becomes involved. Nubia is kind of served as a buffer between Egypt and the rest of Africa. Nubia was uh, a key part of the trade route between the rest of Africa and Egypt. So, food going out of Egypt, some of the minerals going out of Egypt into Africa, and things such as ivory, ebony, gems coming into Egypt, all through Nubia. But of course, what's interesting here is that Nubia serving in this role, right, as go between, um, ends up with a lot of people of mixed race, right? A lot of people of mixed backgrounds. Because you have people from Africa coming in, you have people from Mesopotamia coming through, going south, you have people from Egypt coming through and going south. And so you really end up with this mixed populace that nobody's particularly worried about being mixed because pretty much everybody was. So it's an interesting place. Um, uh, the people there, the Kushites, adopted Egyptian practices, um, but while still maintaining their own distinctly Nubian identity. They still worship their own gods, although they also built pyramids. Um, they built their pyramids, though, were not the broad, sprawling things. They're much narrower, much more focused, closer to the obelisk form. Um, and Egypt really relied on Kush for a lot. Kushite soldiers were renowned for their prowess in battle. And so the Egyptians would often hire Kushite warriors. Um, but as Egypt began to struggle, uh, actually Kush found itself in a position they ended up taking over for a period of about 100 years. They took over Egypt itself. Um, and it was actually one of the broadest uh, empires of the time. Um, but that only lasted for about 100 years um, until being conquered by the Assyrians. Um, Assyrians left a local dynasty in charge, the 26th dynasty, who ruled out of the city of Memphis. Persians ended up invading in 525, and Egypt basically became a province of the Persian Empire. They had brief periods being independent, being ruled for about the next 200 years. and when we had Alexander the Great take over. Um, so after Alexander died, he left one of his generals, Ptolemy, in charge, which started up the Ptolemaic dynasty. Um, and finally, that dynasty would fall to Rome. So we see this period with Egypt, and I don't think there's, again, outside of China, where we can look at a culture and say so much remained stable, so much remained unchanged within a single culture for so long on so broad of a scope. There's certainly cultures that were smaller, right? But Egypt was an empire, and it was an empire that, for the better part of 3,000 years in one form or another, was great. Um, all right. So, again, don't forget, uh, get your discussion boards done. Make sure I believe we should have a quiz on these chapters coming up relatively soon. So make sure that you are reviewing for that, if that is indeed the case. It's on your syllabus, it's on your schedule. So make sure that you have that. If you have any questions, hit me up on the remind, and have a beautiful day, guys.